living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Today is about your vote. I'm Dr. Carol, and you're listening to Relationship Prescriptions. You have voted. Now, maybe you didn't know you voted, but you have. Today, we are sharing clips from the top most requested podcast episodes from 2021. And if you downloaded and listened to one or more of our podcasts this year, you voted. And thank you. Thank you for being part of our podcast family. And to wrap up 2021, we are sharing clips from those that you listen to the most, the top 5 episodes. I think that these episodes tell us a lot about things you are struggling with and about the help you are receiving from this podcast, from the guests that have shared their wisdom with us. And this is a real fun episode for me to do because I get to review what you think is most important. And we are going to jump right in. We will do a countdown. So the 5th most listened to, most requested episode from this year was our conversation with Marty Pieper. Marty is an author, a collaborative writer, an editor, and a speaker. A few years ago, her husband was diagnosed with dementia. Walking through that journey of continuing their marriage, of the financial challenges, and most importantly, how does God play into the journey when there is such an enormous, ongoingly worsening problem in the person you love the most? Now, in our world currently, dementia is not something for which we have a cure. And Marty is right in the middle of that journey with her husband. And yet, embracing what God has to say and experiencing what it is like to walk this journey with him, I think that is why so many of you found this episode meaningful. When there is uncertainty in our world, what does it look like to walk with God? Now, in our world in the last, 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has made everything so much more uncertain. I think this is kind of a paradigm of life in general. Nothing is really certain. We may intellectually believe that, but we kind of go about much of life as though we know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we really don't. And Marty's experience with her husband's dementia just brings that every day right into focus, right in her daily reality. Here is a clip of my conversation with Marty Pieper talking about uncertainty and what it looks like to trust God in the middle of that.
I've thought of that scripture and many others through this journey. In fact, one thing I want to say for sure is that I don't know how people do this journey without the Lord. I'm not grateful that my husband has dementia, but I am grateful for the way God has been so present with me, even in that uncertainty. And I think that also is something that I would hope other people can draw on, that whenever I've asked God to be there for me, he has been right there. The journey didn't go as I would have wanted. As a writer, I want to lay it out and, of course, have a happy ending. But there's happiness along the way. And there have been so many times where I've had a very specific, I need this, God. I need you to be this. I need you to do this. And he has been so faithful to me. So I can rejoice in the midst of this, just as we can rejoice and find things to be thankful for in the midst of our pandemic as well.
That's a great perspective. And it comes from a heart that knows Jesus and has walked with God for a while. From that place, what would you say to someone who says, well, God is supposed to be good, but I prayed and he hasn't answered my prayers. How can I trust him and believe that he's good when he doesn't give me what I need? How would you answer that?
Well, first, I would be sad that if it's still in the pandemic, because I would want to give them a hug if that was an appropriate situation. I would probably want to not say a lot, Dr. Carol, but just to listen to their story, because they're obviously speaking out of a place of deep pain. I could share that God didn't always answer my prayers at the time or in the way that I was hoping he would, but that he always was faithful to answer. I do depend on Jeremiah 33:3, come to me and I will hear you, I will answer you, and or call on me. And so I think that we as a culture and as individuals tend to be so impatient. We expect God to work on our timeline. And there's a story, I'm sure you know it, in Daniel 10, where he says he was answering Daniel's prayer before it was even prayed, but it didn't look like that to Daniel. And so those are the kinds of things I think of myself when I get frustrated that my timeline isn't like God's. But always in the end, I realized that he was the one who knew the whole picture, whereas I knew just the little tiny bit.
I pray that reminds you that you can trust God regardless of what your circumstances are. You can find the link to the whole episode with Marty Pieper and with all our other guests in the show notes for this episode. So if you like any of these clips, make sure to check out the show notes and listen to the full episodes. Well, continuing our countdown, number 4 was our conversation with Kat Harris. Kat is a Bible student. She is the host of the Refined Collective podcast, the co-founder of the online publication The Refined Woman, and author of Sexless in the City. Kat, as an unmarried Christian young woman, has dealt with all the questions that I think all of us really deal with, but the difference with Kat is that she doesn't just brush them under the surface. She was raised in conservative Texas in the purity culture. She moved to New York City, which was anything but a conservative culture, especially when it comes to sex and sexuality. In that process, she asked the tough questions about what she believes and what the Bible actually says. In this portion of my conversation, Kat talks about how an unmarried person, as a follower of Jesus, deals with sexual desire and sexuality and just all the stuff, all the things there. What does that look like for an unmarried person to deal with that?
I think the first thing that was super helpful for me was just distinguishing between sexual desire and desire for sex.
Okay.
So desire for sex means I want to have vaginal intercourse.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what that means. I have a desire for sex. I'm feeling turned on today. I want to experience physical intimacy. I want to have sex with someone. Sexual desire is, I believe, more expansive than that. And I'll go through a book I read by Deborah Hirsch defines sexuality and desire sort of like this, is that sexuality is the human desire that we all have to connect outside of ourselves with lowercase o others. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in that perspective, sexuality and sexual desire become more like a book. And if it was a book, then sex itself would be one chapter of this book. Okay. And so what felt so empowering to me about that was it felt like, oh my gosh, culturally and in the church, we've become fixated on this one thing. Mm-hmm. And we've said the only way that we can manifest or express our sexual desire is through desire for sex.
Yeah.
When actually it might be this bigger, multifaceted, layered experience. So if really sexual desire is a human desire to connect with other people, then that's really good news for a single person.
Yes.
That means that there are a plethora of ways to get creative and brainstorm of how can I connect with my sexual desire in a way that I stay in alignment with myself, God, and others. Because when I believe the definition of sin is when I make a choice, thought, or action that separates me from God, myself, and others. So how can I stay in integrity with myself, God, and others in my sexual desire? How can I move forward? How can I dream of other ways to connect with my desire or have an eroticism for life outside of penetrative sex if I'm choosing to abstain from that as a person of faith until marriage? So like a few practical things to, don't just want to like talk theory. Something that's been really helpful for me is just to acknowledge my desire. Acknowledge and express gratitude for it. Wow, like I feel turned on right now. Wow, thank you, God, for making me have nerve endings and feel connected to my body. Yeah. Thank you for a desire for connection, for intimacy. I'm not going to pretend that it's not there. It's actually one of the most human things about me is that I have sexual desire and desire for sex. So let's first normalize the experience of being human. Let's normalize, Let's not shame it. Let's not put it in a box on a shelf for one day when. Let's acknowledge it and express gratitude for it. And then from there, I want to get really honest with myself. Like, what am I wanting to happen in this moment right now?
Yes. Good.
Do I want to go on a date? Do I want to cuddle? Do I want to have sex? Do I want to masturbate? Maybe I just want to go for a run. Maybe I'm actually really lonely. And what I really want is to feel connected to another person. So maybe I can call a friend, like get really curious about pausing and listening. What is it that I want?
Now, Kat and I are from two different generations, but we share so many of the same perspectives on what God really built into us when he built us as sexual beings. And that holds whether you're married or not married. I think you would find the whole episode quite encouraging and very frank, a very open conversation. Continuing our countdown, number 3 is my conversation with Dr. Rona Epstein. She is a licensed psychologist and addictions counselor who has personally experienced recovery from food addiction. For over 30 years now, Dr. Rona has been helping individuals find freedom from food addiction. Her book, Satisfied, and the Satisfied Workbook help individuals apply spiritual principles to how they steward food. I think many of us may intellectually agree with that you don't always eat only because your body needs food. There are so many other reasons. Certainly there's environmental cues, but there's also emotional factors and spiritual factors. In this clip, Dr. Rona Epstein is talking about how our going after food it can be from all of these different hungers. It may be physical and it may not be. How does the physical and also the emotional and spiritual components of our neediness play out in our relationship with food?
I think it's a threefold problem. I think it's a physical problem in that we have trouble with foods that are addictive and that actually physiologically we can't stop eating because they were purposely made so that we wouldn't be able to stop eating them. So I think it's physical and I think it's emotional, like we've been saying, but and spiritual in the sense that I think I think most of us, if we're human, we're going to struggle spiritually. I mean, everybody struggles spiritually, right? We all struggle in our relationship with God, like we do with all of our relationships. We project things onto God, like, we misunderstand God. We project our father images onto him, or we think he's distant and he doesn't care, or other people's problems are more important, or we just don't know how to connect with him. Everybody goes through seasons of dryness or struggle, I think. And then I think too, there's a multitude of spiritual issues that are involved where somehow guilt and shame can block Like if we're overeating and we get blocked with the shame of like, I'm out of control and I'm hurting the body, the temple of the Holy Spirit. And then we feel like God won't like me anymore because I'm being bad, or, like people do all kinds of things. So, I mean, there's root issues in terms of, I don't believe that God, like not knowing the love of God, instead going to another source for love, another God. In a sense, I think, and this is something I had to learn in my journey to recovery, probably the most important thing I would say in the heart of my recovery was coming to the understanding that if I had to make a choice, between which God I was going to be my God, like that food, it was either going to be one or the other. And because clearly every time I used food, it was like turning to a false God. For me, I was depending on a false God. And I had to face that spiritually there was a wrong, my heart was wrong towards food. And when I understood that, if I wanted to have a real relationship with the living God, that I had to put away that false God, that cheap, fake thing that I was using to satisfy myself. Yeah. And so, I think it's to come to know the love of God and to really know that that's the deep satisfaction, that's what my books are, my devotional is called Satisfied. And the workbook, which is the 12-step workbook, is called the Satisfied Workbook. But that's where that really comes. God is the true satisfier of our soul. And, so food just doesn't do it. It's just, it's the wrong food. There's a food, there's the spiritual food for your spiritual health. And then there's the physical food for your physical health. And you can't,
Well, food is something every single human being has to deal with. If food struggles are a part of your journey, and frankly, that was part of my journey years ago, then this full episode is something that I think you will very much enjoy. Continuing our countdown, number 2, the second most requested episode on our podcast for 2021 was the one we titled, What Do You Want? With Dr. Curt Thompson. Curt Thompson is a board-certified psychiatrist and the founder of Being Known, an organization that develops resources for hope and healing at the intersection of neuroscience and Christian spiritual formation. He's the author of several books, Anatomy of the Soul of Shame, and his most recent work, The Soul of Desire. Dr. Thompson and I share something, and that includes our medical training and experience. Now, we're in different fields of medicine, but the medical paradigm. And one of the things we talked about in this conversation, which I think is certainly among my favorite for the year, was how looking under the surface of the way God made us gets far beyond the way we as physicians normally deal with things. I was trained, as Dr. Thompson was, in the medical system, that when a patient comes to you, you look at the problem, you try and make a diagnosis, and then you decide on a treatment. But is that how God looks at us? Dr. Thompson would say no. This clip will unpack that more.
If we would have only had Good Friday on its own terms and left it there, it wouldn't be good. We wouldn't even remember it as such.
Right.
Romans did their own dirty work with crucifixion, but then wouldn't even write about it publicly. And so they were embarrassed enough about it. We hardly would have remembered this. But because we look at Good Friday through the lens of Easter, we then have reason to look at every moment of trauma and look for the beauty that is waiting for it on the other side.
Wow.
But I can't do this very well by myself because I wasn't made in isolation. I wasn't made by a God who lives in isolation. I was made by a communal God that made us in community, made us for community, made us to create beauty in community. And in the course of being in a community that is committed to vulnerably revealing who we are, what our longings and griefs are, we really do believe that the Holy Spirit in that context gives birth to beauty and goodness in the world that heretofore we wouldn't have expected or anticipated.
That, just hearing you talk about it, awaken something in me. You talk about desire, and that's the title of your book, and longing. I'm thinking some people listening or watching may feel like, well, desire is a selfish thing, but didn't Jesus ask that a lot? Didn't he say, "What do you want?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it strikes me. I mean, I grew up in a God-fearing home, an evangelical Quaker tradition, in which loving God in response to God's love was the kind of common undercurrent of our conversation, of our church going and all the things. But my family was imperfect. And even in the middle of all that, there was the undercurrent of make sure that you're not too big for your own britches.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're not asking for things that you can't get on your own.
Yeah. Be
sure to do whatever you can for other people without asking to be paid for it. The whole notion of wanting something had this tinge of shame that is laced with it. And so you get to places where you don't even know what you want, because okay, I can tell you what I want as long as I know that I'm giving you the right answer. So you can imagine when in his first words in John's gospel, Jesus asks John the Baptist's disciples, "What do you want?" I would have loved if they'd been able to say, "Well, wait a minute, let me think about that," and then given him a straight answer. But instead they're like, "Where do you live?"
Yeah.
And it's true that when we allow ourselves to be asked by Jesus and to be asked by others what we want, if I'm really impulsive and just, really truthful pretty quickly, I can name all sorts of things while I'm saying I'm afraid to tell you that because I'm too embarrassed, or that's going to sound too selfish, or that's going to sound like lust, or that's going to sound like this or that. It's all going to be a reflection of, again, me understanding myself as a problem that needs to be solved. And so therefore, so is my desire a problem that has to be solved. And I hear Jesus saying, well, wait a minute, what's underneath that?
Yes.
And what's the desire underneath that?
Yes.
And I can imagine the conversation with Jesus taking a very long time for him to eventually draw me to a place where I say, I want to be loved and I want to make beautiful things. And he would say oh, you mean you want me?
Yeah.
And you want me to work with you and with your spouse and your kids and your friends and your enemies to make things in the world that will be utterly beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I want. And I have to say that all of my brokenness and all my shame and all my trauma, in very, very subtle, thin micro layers that have been layered on over the course of my, nearly 59 years, get in the way of that. And I need help.
And now, drumroll, our most requested episode, number 1 on the podcast for 2021, was Nick Stumbo from Pure Desire. And wow, the response to this particular episode was just amazing. Now, Nick Stumbo is a third-generation pastor. He served as lead pastor for more than a decade, but he had a secret. He was addicted to pornography. He had done all the things. He had gone to church. He had confessed to his wife and to an accountability partner. He had spent more time with God and praying, and yet this addiction kept coming back. The Pure Desire framework and counseling made an enormous difference in Nick and Michelle's life. It saved their marriage. And because it made such an enormous difference in Nick's life, he brought that to the church with his elders' blessing. He told his story to the church as a whole and brought the sexual discipleship and wholeness program from Pure Desire into his church, and it became an amazing way that the church grew. When we talk about sexuality, it can feel like a very behaviorally oriented program, but that is exactly the opposite of how God made us as sexual beings. And when you get under the surface, below just dealing with behaviors, everything can change. And that is what Nick and I are talking about in this portion of our conversation. Listen here.
Yeah. If we could be honest for a moment, a lot of what happens in churches, and I want to be clear to say I love the church, and my mission is to help the church. So I don't want anyone to think I'm dismissing the church, but I think if we're honest, a lot of church systems are kind of set up to try to create behavior modification.
Yes.
That I confess my sin, the things that I've done, the choices I've made, I receive forgiveness, and then I go out to try harder not to do that anymore. And I've got some more verses to pray about it, and I'm ready to battle that sin in my life. And then I fall back into it, and I feel the guilt and shame. And so I come and I confess. And really, this is just kind of a spiritualized binge purge pattern of I binge into the sin and then I purge it through confession. But all the attention is put on the behavior. And really what we need to do is get below the surface to ask the question, why do I do what I don't want to do? Because if we're continuing to do anything, and this applies whether it's sexuality or food or money, like if we continue to do anything we don't want to do, there's a why to it, that it's meeting a need in our life. It's a way that we're either medicating pain, escaping from difficult situations or stress. It's maybe become a way we manage anger. And underneath even all of that, it somehow has become linked to our identity, value, or worth. And so in my story, like what I was really blind to, I knew I was a people pleaser. I knew I had performance tendencies, but I had never been able to link together how my struggles with lust and pornography were actually attached to that identity piece. Wow. Because if you're in a performance mode or you're a people pleaser, what you know is it's never enough. You can never perform well enough or please people well enough. And at the end of the day, there's this nagging question of, am I enough?
Yes.
Well, do you know what message lust and pornography delivers to the brain? You're enough. And even if that message is only there for a few seconds of, the acting out, and then it's followed by this avalanche of guilt and shame, the truth that we know about the brain and the way our brain has been designed and the way that sin and Satan can hijack our brain is those few seconds of relief where I feel like I'm enough and I'm wanted, I'm desirable. The brain goes, that was worth it. That was worth whatever cost to feel complete. Well, as you can hear in my story, until that pattern is unmasked and God and others are invited into it, I'm going to keep repeating it. And even if I had found success in avoiding pornography, the truth is I would have just found another behavior that was going to make me feel that relief for a little bit of time that I was enough. And so the counseling really became about unmasking that system and all the lies that had contributed to it, so that at that deeper level, I could experience transformation. And like, here's the way I would finish answering that question. I tell people often that when I went into recovery and into the counseling, I thought pornography was the problem. And if I could just fix the problem, things were basically okay. But what I discovered is pornography was the symptom. It was the outcome of much deeper problems. And through the group work of Pure Desire and the counseling work, I was able to actually invite God and others into those deeper issues. And then not only did the symptom of pornography get dealt with, but there were so many other symptoms in my life that began to change as well. Issues with anger and procrastination and arrogance and kind of a my way or the highway mindset. And it was really a beautiful thing when my wife could be able to recognize it too and say, what? It feels like you're changing in this area, which is amazing because that's not even what we're working on. But it's because that deeper stuff was beginning to change, it led to change.
Nick believes that the church can and should be a place where whatever brokenness we are struggling with, we can bring it and find help to experience the transformation that Jesus brings, even if those issues have to do with sexual brokenness. And I am so grateful for his experience and his heart to help people find that kind of healing. Well, that's the wrap, folks. That is the top 5 requested episodes from this past year. And I am so grateful for who you are in being part of our podcast family. As we bring 2021 to a close, I want to remind you that this is a listener-supported podcast. We don't receive money from sponsors for any of this work. If you have been blessed, if you have found some help here on the Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol podcast, I would invite you to do 2 things. First, share, rate, review, leave a comment, help other people find the material that we share here, find this podcast. And second, I would invite you to support the work of Dr. Carol Ministries that makes this Relationship Prescriptions podcast possible. I would invite you to go to drcarolministries.com/give or click the link in the show notes. Here at the end of the year, many individuals and families are looking toward the next year with their financial plans, their year-end giving, and I would ask you to prayerfully consider making Dr. Carol Ministries part of that. If you make a recurring monthly donation before the end of the year, then we have a matching grant that will match your first monthly gift. So when you go to drcarolministries.com/give, just set up your recurring gift. It doesn't matter what the amount is. It can be a small amount or larger. We would just ask you to listen to the Lord and have Him speak to you. And we would be so grateful for your gift. Thank you for your prayers, for your support, for sharing about this ministry as well. As we look forward to 2022, I want to leave you with this word. God is always ahead of us. We need not fear the future. The future is just as open to God is as today or yesterday was. It's as if He is standing in tomorrow, reaching back to you and saying, it's okay. You can come. I'm already here. I've already checked out tomorrow. And it's fine. I'll be here when you get to tomorrow. I pray that brings you hope and peace as you step into the new year. And I pray that you experience God's presence in a very special way. Thank you again for being part of our podcast family. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.